Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another virtual museum lecture series presented by the St. Catharines Museum and Welland Canal Center. My name is Sarah, public programmer here at the St. Catharines Museum and Welland Canal Center, and I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. Our community is filled with diverse stories, and we recognize that our story begins with the Indigenous peoples of this land. We acknowledge that we are broadcasting this lecture on lands that have been inhabited by Indigenous people for millennia, and we would like to honor the centuries of Indigenous peoples who've walked on Turtle Island before us. I am so excited to welcome our own Adrian, Visitor Services Coordinator, to deliver tonight's lecture titled No Exit, the Dead End Streets of St. Catharines. And thank you for joining us for the series. We hope that these lectures are able to provide you with a bit of historical joy and also spark imagination and exploration of our city's rich history. A quick reminder for those of you watching tonight on your mobile devices, please check your audio settings in the YouTube app if you are having any audio problems. You may also not have access to the chat box you see on the side, so you can always post your comments or questions in the regular comments below of the video. Please feel free to ask any questions in the chat box, and we'll moderate these at the end of the presentation. Now, before I hand it off to Adrian, I'd like to remind you of our exciting lecture lineup for the remainder of our Winter 2021 series. On March 16th, our curator, Kathleen Powell, will be on to discuss the Boer War and our local participation in her talk titled For King and Country. On March 30th, we are very excited to welcome local geographer and former Brock University map librarian Colleen Beard to talk about the historic Welland Canal's mapping project. And then on April 13th, we're also very excited to welcome students from the Brock University Historical Society to present a mini symposium on recent undergraduate work. And finally, on April 27th, we're going to close out the winter session of our virtual museum lecture series with a very special guest, author and historian at the Canadian War Museum, Dr. Tim Cook, who will give a talk about remembering the Second World War and his new book, The Fight for History. And we're already working on our lineup for the fall of 2021. So if you have a topic you'd like to see presented as part of the series, please send us a note and we will try to include it. I sincerely hope that everyone has been enjoying our virtual museum lecture series, and I'd like to encourage you to make a donation to the museum in support of our programming. Your donations help to continue to provide the high quality and enjoyable programming that you have come to expect from us. And we really appreciate any donation you're able to give. So please give us a call at 905-984-8880 or email us at museum@stcatharines.ca. Your donation does make a difference. Thank you. And without further ado, I am now very happy to welcome Adrian to the lecture. Take it away, Adrian.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm so excited for this evening's lecture. And it's a shock to no one that it's super long. So we're going to get right into it. Think of a place that's important to you. Familiar and favorite places give a sense of warmth, safety, security, and grounding. The places we love are usually much more than tangible elements like trees and sidewalks, but instead we love them because of the personal connections and experiences we have with those spaces. There's a dead-end road near my parents' house in rural Eastern Ontario. It wasn't always a dead-end road, but it has been in my lifetime. Sometime before I was born, the bridge that connected the two sides, high above the river, collapsed under the weight of a large truck. The bridge dated from the 20s or 30s, when there was some factory and milling activity literally in the middle of nowhere. And by the 1980s, when the accident happened, the bridge wasn't particularly important anymore. Its sister, found downstream, survives, but is blocked to vehicle traffic, and we're not supposed to go on it, but we do. When the bridge collapsed and wasn't replaced, the 200 to 300 meter road that led up to the river began slowly to disappear into the weeds. We played there as kids. Big boulders had been placed in the road where the bridge had been, and this made for excellent games of hide and seek. Oops. Dead-end streets have a particular and special place in our road networks. Most go on, avoided for years, or used as unintentional parking spaces, with traffic appearing by mistake, thinking they've found a shortcut and having missed the no exit sign, only to turn around and leave the way they came. I myself have fallen victim in this way, desperate for a shortcut, only to be foiled by a dead end. Some dead-end streets are accidental, some are planned, and some just happen over time. Regardless of their individual stories or purpose today, a dead-end street can tell us a lot about the history of our urban development, how we use our urban spaces both today and in the past, and most of all, give us a distinct sense of place in an ever-changing urban environment, where sense of place is the only thing grounding us to home. This is a really weird, but I hope interesting way of looking at our city's urban development. I want to acknowledge that this kind of historical narrative is a bit uncharted. Some dead-end streets have an obvious historical reason for being cut off or unfinished, yet the city's planning department does not keep a list of dead-end streets, nor are they a wide subject of study in the body of historical work about our city. They appear here and there on the periphery as local lore, but never center stage in the narrative. In advance of tonight's lecture, Facebook user Bunny Webb posted on our page, quote, "My late husband used to say that the city planner brought home his work at night and his child dropped a plate of spaghetti on it. The city planner picked up the spaghetti and said, 'Yes, this looks good,'" end quote. Other tall tales have the survey crews merely following the cows as they grazed to lay out their plots and streets, rather than any established system. Most of the historical conclusions included in my lecture tonight are not drawn from lore, but are drawn from my own research and examining the historical maps in our collection here at the museum, and drawing inferences from there and confirming its dead-endness from the historical record. Therefore, it's important to note a few things. First, is that there are many, many dead-end streets in St. Catharines, and there's no way I could ever include all the streets in tonight's lecture. It's already long enough, because not every dead-end street is equal in its historical significance. And I've quite transparently chosen streets by which I can relay an interesting narrative about our history. It's difficult to imagine with our complex street network, but mundanity does exist, and not everything is interesting. Second, this isn't a lecture on the history of street names or streets themselves. While that is an incredibly interesting topic on its own, it's a lecture on its own, and I won't be able to talk about street names themselves. If you have a specific question about street names, you can check the excellent repository put together by the Heritage Advisory Committee, and which is now available online, and we'll share that link in the chat box. Third, Colleen Beard's Historic Welland Canals Mapping Project is an excellent resource, but I mostly avoided it purely for the fact because she's here on March 30th to discuss, and the last thing that I want to do is steal her thunder. However, it was an invaluable resource to solving a few strange dead-end streets and questions, as the general collection of aerial photos on the Brock University Map Library's website was as well. Thank you, Colleen, for your hard work. Also, thank you to Brian Nari and Isabel Bachman for sharing their insights on planning versus reality, and for doing a bit of extra digging for me. Additionally, most of the images and sources included tonight come from various local histories on St. Catharines and our own map collection here in the archives at the museum. Finally, the verification of this history is challenging since many of the official sources, including planning documents and even decisions by private developments, are not available publicly or locally. So this journey that I'm taking you on tonight will feel a bit disjointed, but I hope it will spark curiosity in the urban environment around you. I've organized tonight's lecture by historical development theme rather than a phone book list of dead-end streets throughout the city, because I think it's a much more interesting lens through which to view the course of our city's history. We often talk about these historical development themes in isolation, and it's rare that we can trace their physical presence in our sense of space and place in our modern experience in the city. Our one reliable source of physical and tangible history in our city is the dead-end street. Tonight's organizing categories are geographical, environmental, canal building, rail, and planning. Jump in the chat box if you have any questions or if I miss a street, and I do apologize in advance if I leave out a dead-end street that is close to your heart. Let's go. One of the most frustrating things about our city is the same that gives it lots of character, the street network. It's not easy navigating around St. Catharines. If it isn't some random dead-end street, it's an awkward intersection. Before the days of GPS and Google Maps navigating you in your car, it was common for newcomers to get lost, including me. But that same street network that irks even the most experienced of us is the same one that we all dearly love, because it's important, because of its important character and its ability to help us define our sense of place. It's also the reason we're able to identify specific neighborhoods so easily. There are usually physical, geographical, or otherwise street barriers that clearly mark the otherwise imaginary boundaries of our local hoods. But how did we get here? And why did St. Catharines end up the way it has? This is going to be the shortest version of this very complicated story ever. So please forgive me if I parse. Here we go. First tangible and permanent European settlement began to appear in Niagara in the 1770s to the early 1790s, though of course Indigenous peoples have had established settlements in Niagara well before then. During this time, British policies surrounding settlement and the governors who implemented them in Canada varied in success. One thing that's important to remember at this juncture is that British colonial planning essentially prioritized military establishment, especially under Governor Simcoe. Most of the early planned towns were planned around or near the location of a fort. York, which is Toronto, Kingston, and Niagara, today Niagara-on-the-Lake, are good examples of planned towns specifically laid out in relation to a fort. The fort's location, of course, was selected based on the strategic advantages in the geography, in these three cases protecting the mouth of a river. Other than military establishment, planning was otherwise mostly uncoordinated. Planning in the 1780s wasn't really what we think of city or urban planning today. Instead, the organization of land settlement was performed by surveys carried out under Governor Haldimand between 1787 and 1789, mostly for the purpose of giving out land grants. Here in the township of Grantham, land grants went mostly to veterans of the Butler's Rangers, where they were the largest group of land grants, including Richard Pierpoint, who I've highlighted on the slide. The British survey system is based on a grid, which is great if you live in a square box, if you're lucky to live in a good enough parcel, but it doesn't take into account the geography of a place. And so many physical barriers can easily split surveyed plots, including hillsides, streams, creeks, rivers, regardless of the concessions that are drawn. The early establishment of government in what was to become Upper Canada was challenging. One way to help settlement take hold and push forward was to require settlers with grants to begin to cultivate their land within 1 year of arriving. This requirement had settlers begin to clear land, build homes, and construct the beginnings of road networks, mostly to connect their homes and farms to each other or major services or other bigger, more established roads. Lieutenant Governor Simcoe advanced road building throughout Upper Canada during his tenure, using soldiers to build some major highways between important sites. The best example is Highway 2, which connected major towns along what we now call the Cornwall-Windsor corridor. With the exception of road allowances, the planned location of roads at the edges of plots, the lack of government instruction and boots on the ground to control it, the establishment of road networks were really left to the population and settlement trends, including industrial activities. Stagecoach routes, everybody say that 5 times fast at home. The canal and railway companies when they were established, as well as historical routes and geography, including, as I've mentioned already, well-established routes used by Indigenous peoples for thousands of years. Here we go, our first category. Geographical environmental. The geography that Indigenous peoples and early European settlers dealt with, is the geography that we still must deal with today. Despite some major changes to its path and depth, 12 Mile Creek is still the major obstacle to movement around the city today, as it was in Merritt's day, with only a handful of crossings. The escarpment and some other interesting elevations throughout the city are also challenges to creating a normal street network. That brings us to our first historical development theme, of course, the geographical environmental. We're going to head over to Grapeview Drive at this part of the city, an old part of the city and a new-ish part of the city. In terms of development, the first example I'd like to give is Grapeview Drive, of course, because it is a modern street that has a dead end as old as the glaciers. 12 Mile Creek is a part of the many land and water formations left behind by the glacier's retreat some 12,000 years ago. From above, it's clear why Grapeview's eastern reach is a dead end. But there's an additional component to this history in that perhaps if the GM lands weren't there, as you can see in this photo, a bridge might have been built across to Carleton, ? And then you can see a thing here. So indeed, since both are regional roads, both ends are regional roads. In fact, the Grapeview used to be called Carleton Street West, Carleton Street West. Since they're both regional roads, perhaps a likely future development down the road might be another bridge crossing at this location. But we'll get to that in tonight's later. There is another crossing in this area that we'll get to later in tonight's lecture. Now we're going to head down to Kent Street and Hamilton Street, Hillview Drive, and Sheringham Drive, which doesn't exist. What? Kent Street, and I told you it was going to get weird. Kent Street and Hamilton Street have stumped me quite a bit during this journey. They are dead-end streets since no crossing exists 12 Mile Creek out to the Glenridge neighborhood. But they are also dead-end streets because of the steep hillside, which reaches down to the Participant Trail. And anybody who's been on a walk down the Participant Trail area behind Robin Hall, you'll know it's a steep down the hill. So that's partially, today anyway, a modern reason why the Kent Street and Hamilton Street are dead ends. On a number of planning maps, however, that I've come across, including this phone book map, I've come across something called Sheringham Drive. On this map, it's called Riverside. Oh, sorry, no, that's not right. Sheringham Drive on this map. There you go. You can see it right close to the creek. Sheringham Drive, basically where Participant Trail is kind of today, and Hillview. So Hillview's at the top, and that's there today. And then Sheringham Drive or Avenue at the bottom. And as you can see, it wasn't planned that Kent Street would be a dead end, but it is. The planning maps have Hillview Road connecting right along the edge of the Hill Creek Valley as well. But that plan also has not been fully realized, as you can see here. So Kent Street's a dead end, and Hillview is also, there's a Hillview Road North and a Hillview Road regular. And they are cut off. Because of the edge of the Hill Creek Valley that kind of slips right in between. And you can kind of see it here in this Google Maps photo. And so this challenge has not yet been, this topographical challenge has not yet been overcome. And of course, anything is possible with the right amount of money, but it seems an incredible expense to connect two roads over the gap in the hill, not to mention the awkward property lines that would need to be adjusted to squeeze a road through. So what is Sheringham Avenue? What's going on with Hillview? Oh yes, and here's the dead end at Hillview from today. What's going on with Sheringham Avenue? So luckily some correspondence from our friend Brian Nari, chair of the Heritage Advisory Committee, confirms some planning versus reality. Quote, that part of West End of St. Catharines was subdivided during a pre-World War I housing boom. The land along Pelham Road was purchased by Mahaffey Brothers, Ltd, and surveyed as Plan 94, which was called the, quote, Homeland Plan. The survey was dated January 7th, 1913, and the plan was registered in the Land Registry Office a few days later on January 10th, 1913. That included a public highway known as Riverside Avenue. The name was changed by Grantham bylaw, as you saw earlier in the earlier map, bylaw number 933 in 1952 to Sheringham Avenue. The same bylaw changed Glen Ave to Hillview Road, and Alexander Street became Tunis Street. These bylaws were recorded as Grantham Instruments numbers. You can write these down if you're super interested. 24900 and 34336. The Grantham Miscellaneous Book, Brian continues, recorded a miscellany of all sorts of documents between 1867 and 1984, including Grantham and St. Catharines bylaws. I did not find any bylaws in the volume which referred to the stopping up and closure of Sheringham, but there may have been something registered subsequent to 1984. So it's kind of still a mystery. This picture from 1921 doesn't have anything down there by the creek. There are some walking paths of some kind, and you can see what basically is Hillview Road, kind of skirting along the edge of the hill by Pelham Road, but it's, as you can tell, the difference between a real road and sort of a trail road, it hasn't yet quite been established. And it's still cut off in the same spot as it is today. So if anybody knows what happened to Sheringham Road, whether it was either never built or whether Participant Trail was turned into Sheringham Road, or other way around, if Sheringham Road was, or Avenue turned into Participant Trail, put a comment in the box. That would be great. There's a little bit of a gap between some of these some of these sort of plans from, let's say, the 30s, 40s, and 60s, and then what happened in maybe the last 30 years. And I haven't lived here my whole life, so I don't know the answers to all of those things. And not everybody remembers, of course, either. Anyway, let's head over to Marsdale. Marsdale is a dead end. If you didn't know that, that's because there's a little northern section of Marsdale on the north end of Glendale. The northern stretch of Marsdale Drive is also an interesting mix of residential and geographical obstacles to reach at the northern reach of Marsdale to Oak Ridge. Obviously here, Oak Ridge Public Schools position, you can see it circled there, stops Marsdale from connecting to Oak Ridge Road, which is just north. but it's also an intentional and good place to put a community building, like a school, because the creeks that run towards Dix Creek run through this neighborhood, making property divisions and road placement somewhat more complicated. And take a drive on Glendale, you can see the depth of that creek. Doesn't look deep on the picture, but drive along Glendale and you'll see it's actually, yeah, you can't build a house down there. So it makes for very awkward property lines. In 1960, when Oak Ridge Public School was built, it was likely a conscious decision to not connect Marsdale with Oak Ridge. And the result today is a much quieter neighborhood for a school. We're jumping up. We're all over the place, everybody. We're jumping up to Portaluzzi. Woohoo! We're going to go to Brock Street and check out that dead end and a couple of others that go along with it. Brock Street in Portaluzzi has an obvious geographical stoppage, making it a dead-end street. Of course, the biggest geographical and environmental stoppage in St. Catharines, Lake Ontario. You can't build roads in the lake. Indeed, this street setup in Portaluzzi reveals a lot about the original surveys for Grantham Township, but also the eventual division of property later on. Those surveying nerds out there will know that the lakeshore presented surveyors with a broken front in the surveying system, meaning that a straight line couldn't be surveyed along the lakeshore proper, so they stepped back and surveyed a straight line from there. Properties between the frontage and the lake were still divided concessions, and since the survey followed the angle of the lakeshore, this issue of connecting streets inside the plan of Portaluzzi left some streets unconnected at the lakeshore. As you can see, the grid plan for Portaluzzi allows some streets to connect because there's space, or because the properties were originally divided to include road allowances. So either the properties were the right size that we could fit another street in, or they were too big and we couldn't fit a street, as you can see from the grid. So the remaining effect is this leapfrog effect of a few dead ends until there's more space for a parallel, and then a few more dead ends until there's more space for another parallel or avenue to extend the grid. And that continues in Portaluzzi all the way up until there's a brand new type of subdivision introduced much later in history, built in a different style from the grid, instead uses cul-de-sacs, which helps to eliminate some of the proper dead ends. So, okay, let's jump down to Meriton. If we're all the way north, we might as well go all the way south. So let's jump down to Meriton now and take a look at this beautiful street called Christina Street. It's a tricky street, this Christina Street. When the canal was built, a number of parcels of land were reserved for the canal and later government operations on the land on the southern section of what we call Neptune Staircase. You can see it there, locks 16 to 21. This was to establish canal operational lands and for a place to set up lock tender houses, one of which still stands today. The other purpose of establishing sort of government lands and canal lands and that kind of thing on this side was that the locks were on this side and the canal ponds were on the north side, as you can see, north and east side, as you can see in this picture. And that's where the factories would set up. So on the northern and the eastern sections of the canal in Meriton, the remaining land was subdivided and planned out in very small lots as early as the 1850s for many laborers who would arrive and settle more permanently between the 1860s and 1890s to work in the various mills nearby. So you can see the lots up the escarpment. There's even an esplanade where there wouldn't be any developments, that the people in sections 19 and 20 and 18 and 17 would have very pretty views of the city. So you can see that that idea is like, we're going to establish sort of the larger property owners up the hill, and we'll pack all the laborers, all the factory laborers into the tiny lots in Meriton. So land on the south side of the canal was slowly reclaimed for residential use, as I mentioned, but the escarpment remained a physical challenge. Of course, another enormous environmental, geographical barrier and challenge is the escarpment. So today, Allenburg follows a much gentler slope than it did, connecting Bradley with Mountain, but the hillside at the end of Christina was challenging enough not to be completed, despite many planning maps claiming that it had been. Every map that I could find has Christina, once named Yates, which was changed at amalgamation in favor of the more famous Yates Street up here in St. Catharines, as connected between Bradley, which was once named Lock Street, as you can see, and Mountain. But even from, here it is again, now instead of Yates, it's Christina, it says that it's connected. It's not connected. But even in the aerial photos from the 1920s and the 1930s and even the 1960s, this is 1965, Christina is not connected, doesn't show up. When the property further up, just up the hill from Christina Street, was developed as Southgate Circle with a cul-de-sac, it remained unconnected. Having spent, here it is, there's the cul-de-sac up the hill there, and this is the end of Christina Street. Having spent quite a bit of time staring at various maps, I decided to reach out to Meriton resident and historian extraordinaire, Isabel Bachman, for help. Here's what she had to say, quote, "Christina Street was never connected to Mountain in my lifetime. There was a pedestrian path that went down from the hill. That's our clue, pedestrian path sometimes equaled future road. So there was a pedestrian path that went down the hill, which is fairly steep in a short distance. I suspect that's why it was never opened up, and I agree. It made, quote, it made a great tobogganing hill, though. We could make it from the farmyard that spanned the road allowance at the top of the hill and ride down all the way down to Lock/Bradley Street. The road allowance still exists, even though it can't even be bushwhacked these days between Christina and Southgate. It looks pretty thick in there. Could probably maybe get through a little bit in the winter, but in the summer that must be very overgrown. The homeowners on either side at the site of the old farm have adapted it to be a veggie garden. That's cute. She added, quote, "The escarpment defeats even the most enthusiastic planners. Take Allenberg Road." This is Allenberg, which is a block over from Christina, which was a really steep dirt track between Mountain Road and Town Line, which is the block further up, just on the other side of the van that's going up Mountain. You might have been able to make it with a motorcycle, but even that would be tricky because of the deep ditch in the middle formed when it rained. We called it the Gully Road because that's all it really was. It's badly overgrown at the face of the escarpment, and it confuses, this is the funny part, it confuses delivery drivers. The road appears to stop, and so you have to take the drive up Mountain, right on Leeson, and right again on Town Line Road to get to the other half of the street numbers. I love Meriton, end quote. I'm grateful to Isabel here, especially since I had not originally noticed the separation of Allenberg itself, but we can include Allenberg Road South on the list of geographical and environmental dead ends. It's all the way at the top of the, you can't see what I'm pointing at, but it's all the way at the top of the hill there. So you can just imagine putting a road up there is not, even this road between Bradley and Mountain, it's kind of awkward. That's an awkward intersection. Having an intersection at the top of a hill, not very much fun, especially for anybody who's driving stick. That's not me. I don't do that. Anyway, so this was an excellent crash course reminder that humans draw maps, and it's possible that the hopes of planning maps may not translate to reality down the road. I hate to say, you can't trust every map out there. All right, let's head over to canal building. Woo! All right, with increasing settlement, of course, came increasing development, and increasing development began to encourage increased industrialization. Unfortunately, and I'm sure many of you are already familiar, industrialization through milling hit a bit of a ceiling in the 1820s when the water levels of 12 Mile Creek were just not able to support the increased milling activity in the area. As the canals were built, the road network was expanded, first to support construction, then to facilitate industrial and residential development. As much as we love the canal is a physical barrier to development and transportation because crossings are expensive to build and to maintain. We know that from historical and current events. A few of dead-end streets from all iterations of the canal still exist, where streets were either bisected by the canal or not built to connect with the other side, if that makes sense. As development grew around them, it became challenging and is still challenging today to solve them once the canals are no longer in operation. Let's head downtown to St. Paul Street, St. Paul Crescent, Renown Road, and Salina Street. A great example of some dead ends due to former canal lands is the area of St. Paul Crescent, Renown Road, and Salina Street. Now, I'm not going to include these in the geographical section because they used to be connected through the old canal, but today they are not. Excuse me. Today, they are dead-end roads for the geographical reasons of 12 Mile Creek, as I mentioned, and for the slopes of the river valley, but in the past, they were all connected. In the early days of the canal, there were only a few bridge crossings in St. Catharines, and one was at the bottom of Hayner Street on the west side, where the old bridge sits today. You can go and see it, you can walk on it. It's part of the Merritt Trail path. I guess it would be, the Merritt Trail path and the participant, just beginning of the participant trail. On the east side or downtown side, the road followed a similar path to the Merritt Trail today and kind of snakes its way up the hillside to join with the street network at the bottom of St. Paul Crescent. As you can see there, St. Paul West, Yates, and all the way over here. So I'm going to get out my annotate tool. What? Okay. This is the current route-ish of the Burgoyne Bridge. And this is our current-ish abandoned bridge, and the trail goes over here and the trail goes over here. The trail goes over here. And this road used to go up and around and connect to St. Paul Crescent. So, which is not really a main road anymore. Okay. But St. Paul Crescent also connected along the side of 12 Mile Creek to Salina Street over here in the Yates Street district via Brewery Street or road. And it was sort of a street / driveway. So you could still go through, but it wasn't a big road, as you can see in this photograph here. So you've got a bit of a street and then some driveway area up here to Salina on the left outside of this photo. Through the Taylor and Bate Brewery lands in that area. When the original high-level Burgoyne Bridge was constructed in 1916, a straight route was put through to St. Paul Street, which is just north in this photo. Not the right direction, but in this photo, up. The old route was still accessible until the 406 was built and changed the area and hillside quite dramatically, leaving only the bridge, our current little tiny bridge, footbridge, as a reminder. Renown Road, of course, was always a dead end of sorts since the pathway was the main entrance into the famous Chickaluna Shipyard, which was backed by the hillsides that make up Western Hill and Ridley neighborhoods. Now, as you can see, there's not really anywhere to go at the end of Renown Road and the Chickaluna Shipyard. Let's head up to the middle of St. Catharines, Monroe Street. Monroe Street is an excellent example of an unfinished connection because of the third Welland Canal. The street existed when the third canal cut across the north of St. Catharines. But as that route was filled in through the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, the city maintained ownership of much of the reclaimed land, and in this case, chose to build a park space rather than connect the road. As the reclaimed lands of what used to be the third canal, you can see it over on the left-hand side of this photo in the blue circle. This is a complicated map. As the reclaimed lands of what used to be the route of the third Welland Canal were slowly overtaken by development, the route itself is slowly being erased. But the street network originally broken by the canal remains as a reminder of its presence. And doesn't, and now that the QEW goes through in that neighborhood, doesn't make for any easy intersections. Let's head down to Moffett Street, the most famous of our dead-end streets at this time. Moffett Street is my favorite dead-end street because it's a double dead end. I should note that my enthusiasm isn't in that it presents frustration and fire safety risks for the people living there, and we should not take their situation lightly. They only have one entrance into that side. It's a good example of some really interesting development decisions, along with the existing challenges of 3 major transportation routes and other geographical elements cutting off the neighborhood from the rest of the city. On its north, the 406, and just outside of this map, the 406 and the canal, the old Welland Canal, come too closely together with geographical obstacles. So a road to connect to Westchester at the north is not an option. On the west, the Highway 406 and the golf course present another geographical and transportation obstacle for connecting the neighborhood through to Glenridge, as you can see, which kind of would make sense through the Burgoyne Woods area. At the south, Moffett Street is cut off by the CN rail line, as you can see, that cuts across this map. And while many suggest the link between Glengarry or Glendale, as you can see just at the very south of this map, that kind of makes a little bit of sense there. At the south, there are considerable geographical obstacles, including the Second Welland Canal, in the way of easily and unfortunately, it would be very expensive to link the two areas in that way. Finally, on the east is the old Second Canal itself. Along with the Old Creek Valley, Moffett makes its only crossing to Oakdale over sort of a higher level bridge across the top of the locks to Oakdale at Disher Street, which I've circled here. Moffett Street is a great example of the multi-layered nature of our street network history in St. Catharines, representing all the thematic impacts of urban development in one little area: planning, rail, canal, and geographical. And you can, if I zoomed out, I can't do it here in the slides, but you're welcome to visit this particular photograph on the Brock University Map Library's aerial photo collection. If you zoom out, you can see Moffett continues, stops, and then that you kind of would suspect that it would continue to the meeting of the Canal, Dix Creek, and 12 Mile Creek. And like maybe they could build a bridge or something there, but there never was. And so now when the 406 is there really isn't any space for a road to go north. This is an active planning situation, by the way, which is also kind of exciting. And again, I should note I'm not excited for the fact that it's a double dead end and that these folks only have one entrance. So fire safety is a big concern here, and security and other that kind of thing, evacuation, that kind of thing. So it is an active planning situation. And I want to make clear that the inclusion of this dead-end street, double dead-end street, is not to bring any personal or institutional judgment of the situation, but just to make everybody aware of the challenges that we face as an old city with many layers of development and developmental history. The planning department has suggested another bridge to cross the Canal Valley where property is available and where a bridge would not impact the existing heritage structures. 1C is one bridge down at the very bottom of this map, and 4 is another option there. Bridges at 1A and 1B don't work because there are existing heritage structures in those little areas. That's why they're not suggesting those crossings. You can find out more about this active planning situation by visiting the city's website and looking for the planning department webpage, and then you can check out their entire presentation, which is pretty cool. All right, choo-choo, we're moving on to rail. Our stop at Moffett Street affords a reasonable transition, of course, to the biggest section of our dead-end street list tonight, which is, of course, dead ends triggered by rail. Unlike shipping traffic, rail traffic, even in 2021, still has reach inside the urban limits of our city. Old rail lines are still scattered throughout the city as either a reminder of our industrial spurs between factories and main lines, or as once important elements of our public transportation system. As the rail lines are slowly erased, it's not always possible to redraw the development that has already grown up around the lines, leaving their awkward fill-in neighborhoods or dead-end streets. The list of dead-end streets bisected by rail is quite long, so I've picked a few favorites, and I've combined many where they share a common bisection. First, we're heading into the Hague neighborhood to see Valette Street. There is Valette Street, a favorite of mine, of course, because it's so weird and awkward. It's a dead-end street, of course, because the NSNT rail line, or the CNER rail line that came down from Port Dalhousie, crossed over the old NSNT trestle bridge, which you can kind of see this crossing. I'll just circle it with my annotate tool here. Oh, I'm in the way. There's the crossing from Port Dalhousie, boop, 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 and into the neighborhood. There you go. Okay, I'm gonna clean that. Okay. Excuse me. So it crossed, this is the other crossing that I was talking about of 12 Mile Creek. The rail crossed the 12 Mile Creek just behind GM, and then came down at this awkward angle and crossed Thomas Street at another awkward angle, so to reach Louisa Street, where then it carried it basically in a straight line all the way out to Welland and Geneva, where the station was at that in the later days of the NSNT. For more history on the NSNT, you can check out my lecture, which was our very first lecture. So it's the very first lecture in the playlist, or the last, depending on how you organize your playlists. When the tracks were removed from the neighborhood sometime between the mid-1980s and the early 2000s, the property was sold for development. And it is very interesting property, but it must be the most awkward property to live at. They literally just built houses on top of the old rail line. And as you can see here, in behind from this photo in 1921, basically in the backyards of houses that already existed on Valette Street and on Thomas Street. And here they are today. So a keen eye, a careful eye, can easily identify the route of the line since the houses are built at the same awkward angle. I encourage you to take a walk around this neighborhood. It's really obvious. If you know what you're looking for, it's really obvious. Very interesting. All right, we're gonna head up to Grantham. Very exciting. North of Bunting, or sorry, not north of Bunting, north of Welland, west of Bunting. There hides an old NSNT line in that neighborhood as well. It's not the old NSNT line in the Hague neighborhood where we just were, isn't the only area where an old line created some awkward streets. All along the old NSNT line in the Grantham area, as you can kind of see here, the dotted line is now kind of an unofficial park trail. A few dead ends exist where crossings weren't planned while trains were running. And after the lines were removed, the line transitioned to an unofficial park running almost from Welland Avenue all the way up to Parnell at the north end. The connections between the dead ends were either not made because of the existing development, or because of an active decision that crossings were not needed in this neighborhood, which also preserved longer stretches of trail. It also just so happens to be, in my opinion, in the weirdest section of Niagara Street, where Niagara Street goes from like super urban to weirdly less urban, but also in a weird spot that you really like, and it's taking you all the way out here. You thought you were on a straight road, but you're not on a straight road anymore. And now you're all the way out at the canal. Where are you? What are you doing? Can you tell? Niagara Street is, I've got some trauma from Niagara Street. It's pretty cool though. On this map, you can see the NSNT line listed there, and our Chorley, Atherton, and Fairview in that Beamer neighborhood being cut off by the line. And they looks like they were planned to be cut off and not continued. as you can see them here in our 1934 photo as well. And I found this really cool sewer plan in the museum's collection, which is also really cool. You can see that they also put in a trunk sewer, or plan to anyway, I don't know if it's actually there, plan to put in a trunk sewer in the Niagara NS&T right of way, but that also they only plan to take sewers underneath the right of way, basically, through Tecumseh, and then also plan for the sewers to be dead ends. So there's like, no, that was a planning decision for sure. Kind of neat. All right, we're gonna head down to Meriton. And we're going to head down to Meriton more than once, but for this one, we're just heading down to the old NS&T line that went to Welland at the dead ends of Ball, Fairburn, and Maplecrest, and then also Essex Lane right there. This set of dead end streets is a bit strange to include in the rail section, since the dead ends could easily be caused by any of the themes that we've discussed thus far. The property lines along the escarpment make connecting these roads challenging. Locks 4, 5, and 6 of the Welland Canal would also certainly have rendered these streets dead ends, but I've included them in the rail section purely for the fact that the old NS&T line that climbs the escarpment on its way to Welland is physically closest to the reason why these streets are dead ends. In another confusing planning map situation planning map versus reality moment, I need a t-shirt that says, "Is this real life?" The maps included an Elm Street, which if you know Meriton, there's already an Elm Street there, so that's not right. So that street, which I guess had hoped to connect the eastern ends of the dead end streets there. From the aerial photo in 1921, we can see there's lots of activity with some driveway in that area. There's some farming activity on the east side of the NS&T line, which kind of curves in. You can see there's lots of driveways. So maybe they perhaps plan to make, again, like pedestrian routes sometimes turn into roadways, driveways sometimes turn into roadways. So maybe they had planned to make Elm Street a street and connect the dead ends. But by the 1940s, in this image as well, you can see quite clearly most of the connections, I'll go back, most of the connections you can see there are mostly gone, and the streets are quite clearly cut off by the NS&T rail line in this picture. So there's really no effort to connect them on the east side. And it would be awkward anyway, because the hillside is awkward. You don't need a road. They're just dead ends. Okay, we're going to go to Ridley Road on the west side of the city. Another straightforward rail bisection is Ridley Road. It's, oh my gosh, this is so long. I'm so sorry. I'll go faster. I'll try and go faster. It's possible at some point that the road was linked, but far after the CN rail track bisected it, only sections of it have been improved, leaving the street disconnected. So it's on a map, and it's also in this photograph as a road, but at some point it was bisected and then unimproved, basically. I imagine there are additional challenges with these awkward intersections that 4th Ave now makes with St. Paul Street. So in that neighborhood, so it would be super awkward around Ridley Road with all of those weird intersections. I'm not sure it will ever be connected, but we'll see. Meriton, we're gonna head down to Meriton because there's so many rail dead ends in Meriton. Above all others, the most technically isolated neighborhood is Meriton. Meriton, as most people know, has very rich industrial history, and during the dominance of the industrial activity in St. Catharines between 1870 and 1920, Meriton was known as the industrial hub of Niagara. Meriton's plan and layout was certainly defined by construction of the first 2 canals, but its urban development since has been molded and shaped by the coming and goings of the railroads. As I mentioned previously, when we were looking at the plans of Meryton, the north side of the canal was designated for mills and factories because the canal ponds available for running mills and factories were on the north and east sides. From there, the town was more or less laid out in a grid with very small lots, which encouraged workers who until the 1870s or so worked seasonally mostly to settle permanently with their families once steam and electricity eventually were introduced into the factory operations. And factories could run all year long. At the confluence of these important industrial transportation corridors are the quite dead-end streets of Meryton, including Hayes, Willow, Keel, and at one point Almond Street and Lane, Chestnut Street and Lane, and Walnut Street and Lane, which were connected by Hastings Street, which sort of squeezes through the corridor, squeezes by the corridor between the town and the Old Welland Canal, but most importantly for this section, the rail route, which was once the CNER, NSNT, and then early days, the Welland Railway. So it skirts kind of between the Old Welland Canal ponds and Meryton proper. Park Avenue is another that ceases at the CN tracks, which I'll show you on this map. There's Park. I pointed out the screen. Here's Park in this area where the Meryton Community Center is and the arena, and is bisected by the CN tracks and does not continue into the older part or the southern part of Meryton. Other dead-end streets in Meryton are also disconnected because of the tracks, including Smythe and Turner Crescent. Looking at a map today, it's clear much has changed, and corridors physically and visibly separating Meryton from other parts of the city are beginning to be filled in slowly and surely, especially in and around the neighborhood of Sobeys and Johnny Rocco's. The old NSNT tracks that were there were pulled up, I want to say yesterday, but it was probably 2 or 3 or 4 years ago. Like in the Louisa Street situation in the Hague neighborhood, it's likely if development replaces old rail line that some more awkward properties and structures will pop up. But more significantly to our lives today and to the planning process in the city is the situation like Moffat Street or connecting the two sides of Chestnut Street. In this neighborhood right here, we have Chestnut Street East and Chestnut Street West, which were used to be separated by rail and canal, so those connections may look easy from our Google Map view, but in reality present considerable and significant challenges. I'm sure we've all experienced the challenges that the limited thoroughfares in Meryton present to traffic capacity as well as quality of life. There's only a few roads in and out and through and around in Meryton. And since most of the small streets are dead ends, it puts enormous pressure on Glendale, Merritt, Hartselle, and Oakdale to handle a lot of traffic. But ask any Merytonite and they'll tell you they love it just the way it is. In this way, I do not envy the city planners who have an incredible pile of layers and considerations to make each more important than the next. And Meryton's history is an excellent case study of the urban planning challenges that modern cities all over Canada have ahead of them, and the vital importance of streetscapes that streetscapes play in forming our sense of place. Planning, it's our last section, and I'm almost done, I promise. Speaking of planning, I should note here that urban planning is a relatively new function of government at both the regional and municipal levels. Regional government itself is also fairly new in the grand scheme of things. Early city planning derives its modern practice from the late Victorian architects who would incorporate streetscapes into their designs. Though, of course, the Romans were known to practice urban planning too. The practice, as we know it today, has only evolved over the last 150 to 200 years. Urban planning has eventually become a profession on its own, and the idea of government leading planning rather than reacting to private development is also relatively new. For those that are unfamiliar, there are many, many, many city and regional bylaws and standards, as well as provincial laws and standards that regulate all things planning. So again, with regards to decisions about the progress of our street network, it's never easy or straightforward as it might seem from the outside. there are a few more modern dead-end streets that, instead of being bisected by the canal or a railway, were intentionally planned to be dead ends. These include cul-de-sacs, but I purposely did not include any specific cul-de-sacs on tonight's lecture because technically they're not dead ends, they're cul-de-sacs. So I'm sorry if you live on a cul-de-sac and I didn't include you. They are technically dead end, or sorry, they are technically no exit streets, but they're a specific kind of subdivision and property development, not a dead end because of some outside force. They are also of a particular type of post-war subdivision development that, while very quiet, and I'm sure very quite nice, are not particularly interesting historically. I could already feel all the comments in the chat box. What about my cul-de-sac? It's okay. Your cul-de-sac is loved. Stoppages. At this point too, I want to add that I didn't include stoppages, which is generally a very tiny, merely meters long dead end, in some cases just 1 meter, and usually related to the adjustment of an awkward angle, an old public to private property access road, or the beginnings of a road that may have been constructed, that may be constructed in the future. Here's a great stoppage, or what I call it, it's not really a dead end, because Balfour actually continues on to Welland, but that awkward intersection, Balfour was corrected, and so the old Balfour intersection there is what is usually referred to as a stoppage in the planning world and in my world. All right, let's head on to Burley Hill because we have a list of planning dead end streets to get to. Burley Hill Drive. What? What are you talking about? It's not a dead end street, but it is a consequence of modern planning, which includes some dead end streets near Burley Hill, including Park Road and Rockdale Avenue, Clearview Crescent, because they used to meet up with Burley Hill Drive, but now they're dead ends. And of course, if you look at that intersection, I wouldn't really want to navigate it. It looks like the most awkward four-way stop. So Burley Hill was rebuilt to facilitate better traffic flow into Meriton in the sometime between 1963 and 1965 to better facilitate traffic flow into Meriton and down to the Penn Center, along with additional rerouting from the 406 in case there was an emergency. The road already has enough traffic, and additional entrances at weird angles, I'm sure you can agree, would only make things more complicated and potentially unsafe, especially with the amount of traffic that is there today and the school and so on and so forth. We're going to head back downtown Queenston neighborhood to Prince Street. Prince Street is an example of an early planned dead end because the early days of urban planning across the world movement was sparked by the intensity and bareness of the industrial urban landscapes that had formed at the end of the late 19th century and early 20th centuries. This is called the City Beautiful movement, and it was a product of the late 19th and early 20th centuries when buildings were getting bigger and bigger, and the character of the community was being swallowed up. Our sense of place was disappearing. The movement was also notable for its enthusiasm, and one of its proponents describes the movement thus, quote, "It would be a great advantage if the idea could be got in the heads of architects that beauty is not only a quality to add to a city, but that it is or is not the structure of it. Every street in the city should be made as beautiful as can be, and every building, as far as possible, should cohere with the general plan. Then we will have a beautiful city and not otherwise. It is not merely by erecting a fine structure here and there that you will make any great improvement, or even laying out a bit of park, although that might be an item. The construction of a city throughout should be made as beautiful as possible." Unfortunately, the ideas of the City Beautiful movement relayed here by one of its leaders, Percy Hobbs, a professor of architecture at McGill University in 1904, were incredibly fussy, that's my word, fussy and expensive for municipalities, and generally proved unrealistic in a time of great poverty, class division, war, and eventually financial depression in the 1930s. There are many surviving examples of the City beautiful movement, however, especially in streetscapes and urban plans throughout Canadian cities. The most famous semi-locally is the Westdale neighborhood in Hamilton. Elements of the city, elements of the movement's, ideas, just elements, bits and pieces, survive, especially the emphasis on park space and, in this case, the importance of civic buildings at the center of city plans and streetscapes. And Connaught Public School is definitely in the center of the streetscape. One of the only examples of planned element with this idea is Prince Street, of course, leading up to Connaught Public School. The timing of the construction is about right, 1915. And the attempt, while perhaps not fully realized today, is obvious in making the school an imposing and therefore institutional and civic building for all who approach. Let's head up to Port Weller and Jarrow Road. The City Beautiful movement was also influenced the areas around the Welland Ship Canal. This is not a picture of Jarrow Road, by the way. As was reported by Toronto journalist in June 1929, the canal's construction areas were essentially a battlefield, disastrous and dangerous. So when I read this quote, just think of the City Beautiful movement in your mind. Quote, "It is a massacre of many miles of smiling meadows and a hideous disemboweling of towns as well as of country. For the last 16 years, a great army of human moles and earthworms have been running through the Niagara Peninsula, the Garden of Ontario, if not the Garden of Canada, an especially huge furrow and burrow. It is one of the world's marvels of engineering, but it is also one of the world's greatest landscape lesions, an ugly incision in the beautiful vineland and peachland." End quote. As I mentioned previously, the City Beautiful movement was quite popular, just fussy and expensive. And so its materialization in reality was relatively rare. But in one case, some materialization did not come about at Port Weller. Some materialization did come about at Port Weller. It was widely held by both John Weller and Alexander Grant, the engineers, superintending engineers of the canal, that beautification of canal lands should be a priority after construction was completed. Thousands of trees were planted along various gardens and other park spaces. Plans were also drawn up for parkways and other leisure spots near the canal, some of which have been achieved and others which met the same fate as many other expensive City Beautiful projects in the 1930s. One example of the City Beautiful movement that has survived is the planned subdivision of Port Weller. Of course, Port Weller, the port, is the northern terminus of the canal, but Port Weller, the community, was intended to make a big splash and attract many to live in a quiet, peaceful, and beautiful space along the canal. Included on the plan for Port Weller is a road named Jarrow Road, which you can see today is a dead end. Oops. Dead end Jarrow Road, planned completion of Jarrow Road. I'm grateful here to Brian Nari, again, the chair of the city's advisory committee, for actually submitting this road to my list, because I otherwise might have just put it off as a geography in the geography category, because it's a bit awkward in that park space. But clearly there is much more to this seemingly uninteresting dead end road. Here is what Brian had to say about Jarrow Road. Quote, "It was laid out under the 1913 Port Weller plan, which you can see here, of subdivision, and was originally known as Park Road. Because the land at the end of the street has a deep ravine where houses couldn't be built, so it was shown on the plan as a park." You can see that in the left corner there of Jarrow Road. There's a park with a little ravine. The name was changed at amalgamation, but better than that, the road as it is presently terminates just beside the Hostetter family burial plot. So it really is a dead end, is Brian's inflection. He continues, "In 1862, when the family sold the farm, they retained the rights to the burial plot, quote, forever, under the deed. Moreover, the deed granted them the right to use, quote, 25-foot road leading thereto, i.e. the cemetery, from the sideline road, which is Arthur Street. I assume that the nucleus for Jarrow Road might have been this 25-foot wide road, access road. Just how uber cool is that, end quote. And I definitely agree. We've seen a number of examples of planned roads that were either pedestrian ways or smaller driveways that kind of advanced into real roads and then became dead-end streets because of particular reasons. In this particular reason, a family cemetery. Thank you so much, Brian, for sharing this road with us tonight. Speaking of literal dead ends, let's head over to Victoria Lawn Cemetery. I can hear the groans from here. Okay, we're going to talk about Emmett at Wilfrid Laurier, one of a very, very old street and one of our newest streets. When Victoria Lawn Cemetery was opened in 1856, it was a perfect spot to begin a new cemetery since it was surrounded by farmers' fields and there was lots of room to grow the cemetery. Emmett Street was constructed early on as really just a side street to access the eastern entrances and exits of the cemetery and was extended as needed throughout the years. Today, however, subdivision construction continues to fill in some of the empty lands next to the Welland Canals Parkway, and I wondered why Emmett was not officially connected with the new development through Wilfrid Laurier Avenue. Since this much more recent planning history, you can see there there is a road, but it's one of those little tiny access roads that's just for emergencies and pedestrians. So I reached out to our city's planning department, and the wonderful and now retired Judy Piak, the former manager of planning services, gave a bit of insight about the ins and outs of dead-end streets in modern planning. And this is a great example. I'm going to quote her here because she relays the information so eloquently. She says, quote, "I think each dead-end street has its own story behind it." The Emmett Road dead end, only a pedestrian link emergency access to Wilfrid Laurier, is significantly undersized and was not planned for any upgrades when the Wilfrid Laurier subdivision was designed and approved. With an alternative access out to the Welland Canal Parkway, which is just north now in the newer section of the subdivision, there's no plans to upgrade Emmett Road, and no road connection was permitted. Of course, I don't think Emmett Road is a good road to it's kind of hilly. It's also a lot smaller. Houses are much closer to the street. Not a great road to have as a through road or a secondary road to the Welland Canals Parkway. So she continues, quote, "Certain dead-end streets are ultimately intended to go through another road connection when development intentions materialize. For example, up until the past few years, Dorchester dead-ended at the south end and Dorchester Road South dead-ended at the north end, where my circle is. The intervening lands have recently been developed, and now the two sections are connected. Other situations relate to historical patterns that predate any formal planning process for road design. For example, the north end of Simpson Road, this is all the way up at the top end of Lake Street. For example, the north end of Simpson Road is technically a dead end just before it turns into a private road serving a number of lakefront residences. In this instance, the road is intended to be upgraded and linked through to the north end of October Drive when future development opportunities are available. That might be tomorrow, could be a billion years from now. Many of the dead-end streets, excluding cul-de-sacs, she says, are simply historical. Those streets were built long before any standards were established to provide for road connectivity. They were likely designed that way because that was the limit of the property being developed at the time, and the road simply ended at the lot line," end quote. If you think about the streets you frequented in your life, the roads you used to get to work, the streets you use to get to your friend's house, the avenues you use to get to the grocery store. These are the roads that make up your sense of place. While we don't likely frequent dead-end streets, unless we live there, they are just as an important part of the street network as your route to the grocery store. And now we've discovered together tonight that there is much more history and life in the dead-end streets in our city that we probably initially suspected. Dead ends link us to our physical environment, and they link us to the past. Despite the frustration of running into dead ends or the unfortunate result of being bisected communities, like Meriton being cut off that way, dead ends are much more than just dead ends. Instead, we find great character and joy in the quirks, stories, and curiosities that dead ends bring to our street network and the world around us. If you're like me and you find fascinating the intangible histories found in our everyday things around us, like dead-end streets, then I know you enjoyed tonight's presentation, and I thank everyone for tuning in this evening and sticking with us. What a surprise. I went super long again. I think I hold the record. I don't think anyone can beat my length record. All right, Sarah, I'm all done. Take her away.
That was so awesome, Adrian.
I'm going to bed right now.
Oh, it's amazing how the research in this is incredible. I'm really excited to go through this again and again. I also want to just take a tour of all these dead streets now. So I have some
yes,
plans.
And I love your recommendation of turning this into a blog series on the museum's blog. I think that's a great idea and something that I will definitely get to at some point.
Especially with all the maps, like just being able to compare all of those changes. I think it's amazing.
And
so
I know you want to continue and cut me off, but I was talking with Kathleen as well, and we're definitely going to turn this lecture into some kind of exhibit to display the full maps that are in the museum's collection, because they're pretty incredible maps. They're wonderful for the dead ends, but they're also really cool material culture as well. So everybody stay tuned for some exhibit stuff in the future.
That is very exciting. You heard it here first.
You did, because we just kind of decided this afternoon.
That is awesome. I love the maps in our collection, and you did a really great job of really telling this massive story of urban development.
I'm so sorry, everybody, that I went long, but it wouldn't be an Adrian lecture if it wasn't over 70 minutes.
Oh no, we loved every minute of it. So thank you to our viewers. Please, if you have any questions about tonight's presentation, please post them in the chat box, and we'll get to them. If you're using a tablet or a smartphone, you might not be able to see the chat box, so put your questions in the comment section. We'll get to those too. We already seem to have some questions, but while we're waiting, what a great opportunity to thank all of you for attending tonight's lecture, for all of your support for the virtual museum lecture series. And if you enjoyed tonight's presentation, please consider making a donation to the museum so that we can continue to deliver the high quality programming that you really have come to expect. So to make a donation, please call us at 905-984-8880 or museum@stcatharines.ca. There are also so many lectures to watch. If you haven't watched them already, head to our museum.
Including other 70 to 90 minute lectures by yours truly.
Lots of content to keep you learning and engaged and inspired by St. Catharines history. So check out our YouTube channel. They're all in a playlist. You can watch and share around with your friends and family. Also, please, if you like our content, definitely please like, follow, or subscribe on our social media channels, including here on YouTube, to stay in the loop for all of our virtual programming. And also share these on your own social networks to help more of our community join in all of our historical adventures. Furthermore, we do have two podcasts you might be interested in if you like this deep dive nature. There's Museum Chat Live, as well as 1 hour in the past, which I see a new episode is launched on Friday, correct?
Yeah. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's so exciting. We're doing food the whole season. Season 4 is just all about food. And the first episode was with spices, all about spices. And we had a special guest, Stephanie Baswick Powell from Port Colborne Historical and Marine Museum. And we will have special guests throughout the rest of the season as well. 6 episodes, all about food coming at you.
That sounds delicious, actually. Yeah, so definitely look out for our podcast as well. Yeah, so now let's go to your questions. I know you have I'm seeing lots and lots of positive comments.
That's good.
Yes, lots of thank yous.
Thank you for sticking with me, everybody. I really appreciate it. I guess nobody has really anything else to do.
It's true, and I mean this again. We're all going to be going on walks to dead end streets in St. Catharines now.
Yeah, so, I wanted to say that. Of course, please go and walk some dead end streets. Definitely take a drive to some of these places. They're super cool. And I really recommend going sooner than later, because when the leaves come out on the trees, especially in the environmental ones, it's really hard to see past. So now is a good time to go and see some of that stuff. And then of course, yeah, check it out.
Yeah, yes, definitely will. So Elizabeth Fraser, she asked a question about the difference between a cul-de-sac and a dead end. I know you briefly mentioned that, but maybe you could just remind us.
Yeah, if anybody watching actually knows the real reason, I mean, Judy kind of alluded to it in her explanation in the email that I just read at the end. The major difference between a technical dead end and a cul-de-sac is that a cul-de-sac is planned. Usually it's part of a private subdivision development where to adjust for not enough road space or allowances for houses to be built, they put in a cul-de-sac so that you can get the maximum amount of property division in that area and get people there. With people still having backyards and that kind of thing. But if, some good examples you can look at are ones up in Port Dalhousie or the north end of St. Catharines, where cul-de-sacs kind of back up to either lakefront properties or the lake itself. And there's nowhere for the road to go. So cul-de-sac is a really good answer for that. Mm-hmm. Dead end streets usually aren't necessarily planned. We had a few planned ones on our list tonight, but dead end streets are usually, as Judy said in her email, and as I said throughout the whole lecture, dead end streets usually have a historical, geographical reason, whereas a cul-de-sac is a planned no exit. So it's not technically a dead end; it's a no exit. Very, very parsing here.
Thank you for explaining that a little bit further.
That's clearer.
Yeah, okay. That is clear, I think. And again, you had a lot of examples of just that throughout your talk today.
And I think that's the main reason is that I didn't cover any cul-de-sacs for that reason, is that most of that style of planning is a post-war time. Mm-hmm. And there's a billion cul-de-sacs. I bet like half the city lives on it. Maybe not half the city. A good third of the city lives on a cul-de-sac. So that kind of planning is kind of post-historical in the time period that we weren't really looking at the rest of the dead-end streets.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Oh, thank you for that explanation. There are a few people who have shared their experiences living on funny streets.
Oh, yes, please do. Please share all the funny streets.
Belle Bachman, she says, I live on Allenberg Mountain intersection, and while driving, it is awkward. Living there affords much winter entertainment. We can see cars stuck in the ice and snow on all points of the compass.
Oh, no. I didn't even think about the winter.
Yeah.
I had a picture of Allenberg there, and yeah, that would not be fun.
No, not at all. But again, entertainment from
fun to watch, not fun to drive.
Not fun to be in. Yes. We also Laurel Candler, she's referring to the Moffett Street dead ends.
Yes.
And she was asking if there might would have there been an ability to connect with Lincoln Avenue, or would you think the train would have been too deep there?
Oh my gosh. I gotta get a map.
Yeah,
I need a map. There's as you can see, there's a lot.
there's a lot of maps.
I'm just gonna go back here. Lincoln. Lincoln. I might have to get the actual Google out.
Mm,
How about you give me another question and I'll look this up.
yeah.
You'd think I would be an expert on all of this. I
Think
like literally need Google.
this has been your life for how long right now?
There's a lot. So yeah, let's go to another one and I'll come back to that.
Deb Whalen, she provides some insight about Niagara Street. She says that the end of Niagara Street was all orchards until the 1960s or so as well,
Yes.
right? So that might have something to do with why it's so wild. And she also says that some of those properties were gifted to war vets, which is interesting. Another interesting part of city planning.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, neat. Again, and two, the northern section of the city was developed over a really long period of time, but in only a handful of styles, if that makes sense. I'm just going to share my screen. So like one part of an orchard or a farm might have been divided up and sold to one developer who did something this way at one particular time. And then like 10 years later, the rest could be developed in another particular way. And so it's really hard for us to see the whole city in one layer. You kind of have to see the city in layers of like decades or years to find that kind of thing. But yes, Niagara Street, weird. Definitely into some old farmland up there. And I hope other people have a better time with Niagara Street than I did. I got it now. It was just like first off. Okay, so we're looking at Lincoln Avenue.
Yes.
There's the option there. Some people have suggested the option here of connection between the top of Moffett and Lincoln. I'm sure the planners would have explored that option. Let's just go to satellite here. I'm not 100% sure. I don't remember. There's a lock there, but I don't remember if there's a lock over here. Anyway, there
might be an old lock that they can't go over.
Maybe? It's possible, but and Isabel will know off the top of her head, but like there's a number. Here's the thing. There's a number of factors that go into their suggestions, and I really recommend going to the planning website and watching their video. They did a whole presentation, and it's a recorded video. You can probably find it on the city's YouTube channel as well, just by searching for Moffett Street on the city's YouTube channel. A number of those considerations also include available property. So they had a lot of concerns about traffic flow. They had a lot of concerns about like headlights in people's houses. They had a lot of concerns about where the heritage properties were, of course. Now, those are the reasons that I hooked onto, but there were also a lot of considerations about what property is available for development. And so it's possible that they looked at this and maybe thought about it. The other thing I'll mention, and that maybe the property is weird. I mean, it's all park space right now, but the property in this area might be strange. The other thing is that this hillside is really awkward. This hillside is much more awkward than some of these others. So that might also be another explanation, but the planning people have a way better explanation than I did. So I recommend going and checking that one out. Checking out that video. It's super cool.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. We have another story.
Yay.
James says, our family used to live at the end of Simpson Road, moved around 1997. It was a great place to bike up and down those private roads as a 9 to 12 years old. That's awesome.
Nice.
Okay, we have both Jerry and Belle suggest that you may want to consider leading some kind of dead end walks in the city tour. So there's an idea.
Does anyone have a teleportation device?
I know, right?
I mean, I could reframe it geographically and organize it geographically, I guess. But could you imagine jumping from Porto Luzzi to Meriton? It would take an entire walking it would take weeks. No, but that's a really great idea. I love that idea. I think we'd have to sort out how to kind of move people around. Or maybe not a guided tour, but like a person, not a personally guided tour, but like a guided driving tour, perhaps.
Yeah, like a little map or a little brochure.
We'll definitely put that on the list. We're working on a couple of sort of published self-guided, that's the word. Published self-guided tours for around the city. So that would be a great one.
Yes, that'd be a great one.
Awesome.
Oh, thank you.
And fun for people to get lost.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you for your suggestions, Jerry and Belle. Belle Bachman also, she's commenting on the Moffett Street Lincoln Ave. She's saying it's too deep, so it would be really expensive. She also says that during the War of 1812, there was a bridge crossing the 12-mile creek used by troops moving east to west. I don't know, but that may be the Ridley Road dead end was where the old bridge was located.
Wow. That's cool. I didn't know that.
Some good insight. Thank you, Belle, for that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Belle. And other than those comments, lots of thank yous for the info. Well done. Great job, Adrian. Yeah. And
thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody. We really appreciate it. We'll see you in 2 weeks for King and Country with Kathleen Powell.
Awesome. Have a great night, everyone. See you soon.
Bye.